Thank you. Well, I want to take a moment to welcome everyone to our discussion today. It's going to be a very important discussion, obviously, and it's critical right now as we try to move forward in this pandemic and see how to work together and get our educational system and our economy moving again. I wanted to also thank you to everyone who donated. I know that we don't charge for these events, but they do cost us some money. This platform, of course, has a monthly fee, et cetera. So I thank you all who did donate to help us continue to bring programs like this to you. We don't have a ton of announcements today. I did want to just note that the league is taking July off from its regularly scheduled luncheons. We typically do a luncheon and a meeting like this during each month, but we're going to skip July luncheon and give everybody a break, but we'll resume on August 19th with a discussion about some of the San Diego ballot measures that we're going to be seeing in November. But I do want you to take a look at our calendar. Our committees are still meeting. You can go to our website and click calendar and get a look at what our committees are doing and when they're meeting and join up if you want to. And I wanted to call special attention to a members meeting that we're going to have on Monday, July 20th at 6 p.m. That's going to be an opportunity for members who want to get more involved during this election season to join in and see what's going on and what we're doing. We're going to give you opportunities to volunteer for some listservs, for action items you can do if you just want to like write letters or send e-forms to your elected representatives. We're going to have opportunities like that for you. Some of the opportunities will be just social media sharing, etc. So come to that meeting if you're a member on Monday, July 20th at 6 p.m. You'll find that on our calendar as well with the join links to click there. And if you're not a member, I invite you to join. We're going to be really busy this election season, doing a lot of great work. We're advocating and we're informing voters, and we're doing get out the vote work. So it'll be a lot of fun and a lot of important work to do. So I want to go ahead and get started with a segue here, because speaking of advocacy and our topic today, which is schools and education, I wanted to let you all know that our organization, the League of Women Voters, is advocating for Prop 15. It's called, well, it has been called Schools and Communities First. It just got assigned its number. Just really briefly, it's a ballot measure or proposition to close the commercial property tax loophole that corporations and wealthy investors use to avoid paying their fair share of taxes. And it's estimated that if this passes, it'll bring in about $12 billion in funding for schools and communities all across the state of California. So I'd like you to take a really close look at that and vote with us on that in November. And speaking of schools and communities, that's what we're here to talk about today. So this topic has been very much in the news lately. If you guys have been following along, you'll know that this has been a really busy week for this discussion about public education and getting the schools open. So on Tuesday of this week, the Trump administration threatened to cut federal funding if schools don't fully physically reopen, and it increased pressure on the education leaders to get kids back in the classrooms. That same day, in a call with the governors, Mike Pence, Vice President Mike Pence, and Education Secretary Betsy DeVos also pushed for school reopening. And they tied America's return to the classroom with the health of the U.S. economy, pointing out that if parents are at home with their kids, they're less able to join the workforce full time. Then on Wednesday, the CDC issued school reopening guidelines that the Trump administration publicly criticized, leaving responsible parties with competing ideas about how, when, and if we will open schools in the fall. And that confusion drove a coalition of education organizations to release a statement yesterday saying science should drive decision-making on safely reopening schools, and public health agencies must make recommendations based on evidence, not politics. So as you can see, it's been a really busy week. There's been a lot of back and forth from a lot of different organizations and people, both in the administration and just interested parties outside the administration. So we're here today to hopefully unravel this mystery and kind of get a clear guideline on how we're going to move forward here in San Diego. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Kim. She's going to introduce our panelists and we're going to get started.
All right, so we've got 4 speakers today, and the first will be Scott Lewis. Scott oversees Voice of San Diego's operations, website, and daily functions as editor-in-chief. He also writes about local politics, where he frequently breaks news and goes back and forth with local political figures. His May 6 opinion piece, entitled San Diego's Not Ready to Recover Without Schools, is what inspired today's topic. After that, we'll go to Mahogany Taylor. She is the president of the San Diego Unified Council of PTAs. She's also the vice chair for the Independent Citizens Oversight Committee for the School Bond Measures S and Z and Proposition YY. Mahogany has 2 children who are students in the San Diego Unified School District. She'll talk about parent interactions and school since the school closure and concerns parents are having with the cases that are increasing. Keisha Borden has been an elementary educator in the San Diego Unified School District for over 20 years. She serves as president of the San Diego Education Association, which is the 2nd largest teachers union in the state. In addition to advocating for educators and students in the San Diego Unified School District, SDEA works to build local coalitions and community partnerships to further public education and advocate for appropriate funding for schools in San Diego. Our last speaker, Richard Barrera, he has represented District D on the San Diego Unified School Board since 2009. Despite the most devastating financial cutbacks in the history of California public schools, during his time on the board, the schools in the San Diego Unified have achieved record high graduation and college eligibility rates. His focus continues to be on achieving equity and excellence for all public school students in San Diego. He's led the district's efforts in securing $8.4 billion for school facilities with 3 successful voter-approved bond campaigns. He currently serves on the board of the Center on Policy Initiatives and the California Immigration Policy Center.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to jump right in. I have so much to talk about, and I want to hear from what everybody's saying. So I appreciate the League of Women Voters for hosting this. Never has there been a issue that I've written about that I've cared or worried about more deeply than this one. And just to give you a basic on my biases on this, I do carry a lot into this. First of all, I have 3 kids going into the school next year, or hopefully. I have a 14-year-old entering high school. She's actually my cousin who's come to live with me. And I have I have a 4th grader and I have a 2nd grader, all in traditional public schools. And we're obviously extremely worried about what's going to happen to them. We're very, oh, there they are. We're very passionate about our local school. My wife's deeply involved in the PTA. We raise money, we volunteer many hours. And I don't need to explain to you what's at stake. Let me share this and get started. So let's see. All right, so I don't need to explain to you what's at stake, but this is Edison Elementary. We did a story several months ago, and Richard Barrera talked a lot about Edison's progress, a high poverty school, kids though that are really thriving, an environment that's really thriving, based in particular on the community. And you look at a picture like this and you realize what's happened to our world, and when we could ever get to a moment like this and an experience like this back on schools. It's something I think about now every day as we go forward. There is a lot going on. Basically, every option has a bad angle. If we continue with remote education, obviously there was problems already and discomfort with from parents to teachers and bad experiences in many cases. Obviously, a lot of people stepped up and did some amazing work. But if you continue with remote education, I worry that schools like Edison may face may sever that connection that they've built with their community, that community that was so important for them to build and to see progress. It's been the model for San Diego Unified for several years to build that kind of community with high expectations, with great parent involvement, and with a rewarding environment for teachers to stay there. The physical connection to schools, so long rooted in geography, is now, I think, at stake here. If we continue with remote options, I think a lot of parents may find other places to go. However, if we go back to physical campuses, we have thousands of public employees right there who often are very vulnerable to the disease, to the virus. And, you know, we have a responsibility as employers, basically, of them to make sure they're safe. And can we assure them that they're safe? And if we fail with either of these options, I think we risk crippling the long-term progress, not only for our workforce, but for equity, for people who, you know, rely on schools every day, not only for education, but for safety, you know, and also for everything from food to their physical activity. The remote situation at the end of the fall, this was just from an editorial today in the New York Times, really bogged down. Boston had a bad experience. Los Angeles, a third of high school students failed to join in. Washington, D.C. just shut down. There was obviously, as there always is, a disproportionate impact on poor students. It was a particularly difficult week, as was just discussed. As we heard the president get involved, it was really dismaying for me to see it start to get politicized. Obviously, it was eventually going to get politicized, but with the president's involvement, he says, let's open schools as fast as we can. And then people pointed out right away that his government's own guidelines, they didn't come out Wednesday, they came out a couple of months ago, saying, you know, how you can open schools came out, and they are part of the key ingredient of why this is such a hard problem. Schools are so much about logistics of caring for students every day, of making sure they're safe every day. And when you add variables like, well, they need to stay apart, that can be very difficult to adjust to. And that's what the CDC did. And so when they presented that back to the president, what about your own government's guidance? He says, well, I disagree with that guidance. It's the dissonance on the national level is striking. It's upsetting. It's very difficult to deal with. When the man in charge of the government pretends constantly that he's not in charge of the government and that he's not doing these things, it makes it very difficult for the governors, for the school districts to respond and deal with it. The logistics, though, are really what we're dealing with. It has so befuddled local school districts across the country. You know, Poway Unified sent out an extraordinary email, I think, the other day, where they said, we are, you know, we're listening to you. Poway came out and said, we're going to do either you're going to go to school full time, or you're going to choose a remote option. There's no hybrid in between. They faced a minor revolt from teachers and parents who are demanding a hybrid option in the middle of that, and more clarity about what happens. And then this quote, it really summarizes for me how difficult these questions are. Something as simple as masks, of, you know, one of these major issues that they're just going to have to decide at some point. They say, as it relates to the wearing of masks by students, there is some confusion that PUSD has either made a final decision that's either anti-mask or pro-mask. We are neither. I mean, I think this kid speaks for us all. What are you talking about? Like, you have to make simple decisions like this. Again, the governor has punted these questions to the school districts. The federal government punted everything back down. And these very basic decisions are really paralyzing the decision makers in these districts. And it's making it very difficult for them to make very simple decisions about what to do. San Diego Unified released a survey saying that 59% of parents want to go back to school. 30% were interested in that option of online, but you can go back. Some very vague right now about what that means, and about 10% don't want to go back. We are entering a very strange political season. I thought that conservatives might jump on the opportunity to see this happen, to see you know, this disruption they've been talking about for a long time, homeschooling, online education, and I thought they would jump on that as look, we've been talking about this for decades. Let's do that. Instead, they've gone with Trump and said online schooling, as he said the other day, is not going to work in any form. And on the other hand, a lot of charter schools, private schools, are seeing the same results from their own surveys. Upward 30, 40% of parents that do not want to send their kids back sometimes. Charter schools like High Tech High recently announced that they were either going to do all school on campus for kids below 3rd grade, or they were going to do all remote learning, or they were going to do a hybrid. But basically, anybody over 3rd grade is not going back to a physical campuses. So, you know, schools like private schools and charters that were traditionally aligned with conservatives aren't going along that same thing about opening their actual physical campuses. I was wondering where the teachers' unions would break. I'm looking forward to hearing from Keisha. It seems like they have broken towards the idea of we are not going back unless you prove that this is a lot safer than it is. They are advocating in LA. They announced they do not want to go back. They want to do full remote learning. And now there's a lot of talk. There's a hashtag going around, 14 days, no new cases, basically saying you can't go back unless we see the virus going down for 14 days, or if not, just completely eliminated. It is just an extraordinary moment in politics now. So my brain kind of breaks. We have teachers unions saying homeschool. We have conservatives say go back to normal schools. Homeschool and online school doesn't work. I never would have imagined that, but 2020 continues to deliver. I could keep going for a long time, but I want to summarize on this point here. In my opinion, there's only one way out to build the confidence to make sure we could get back, and that is widespread testing. San Diego Education Association, the teachers union, made the point recently that they want to see widespread testing. They want to see the virus go away. The county this week announced that they would get involved for the first time in testing, $5 million, which is nothing, but it is a step in the right direction to provide that testing. Kristen Gaspar on the County Board of Supervisors said, don't you dare test my kids, which is fine perspective, but what about the educators? What about the adults in there? It's a major issue. I think that if you can get widespread testing, then open campuses with minimal modifications and spread out, get outside as much as possible. Hey guys, come on. Sorry. Open campuses with as many, sorry about that. Spread out as much outside as possible. And partner with the best online homeschooling platform for the teachers and students who do not want to go back to school. There are people who've been doing this for a long time. Let's actually make sure it's as productive and valuable for it. I don't need to explain to all of you how, if they stay with remote, this is going to be a very difficult experience, particularly for women. I don't need to mansplain that. Also, I just want to make one final point. If it is revealed that bars were opened, and that is part of the reason that the outbreak has occurred and made it more difficult to open schools, well, that should be a stain on the people who allowed that to happen for their entire public leadership careers. Nothing has made me more mad than the idea that we communicated to the public that everything was all right. You can go party, you can go have fun. And if that caused this outbreak to spike and to keep schools closed for longer, we should all be ashamed, and we should bring that fury to the public leaders who allowed that to happen. I find it to be dismaying and very difficult. So there is a lot going on with the politics, the logistics, and the public health concerns. And I look forward to hearing how we're going to wrap that up as well.
Thanks very much, Scott. Definitely a lot to think about right there. Our next speaker is Mahogany Taylor. And to remind you, she is the president of the San Diego Unified Council of PTAs. Mahogany?
Good early or late morning, everyone. Yes, I'm part of the PTA. We are a national organization that has been advocating for children for over the past 100 years. This year is not any different, except for it's kind of focused on some different areas. Our local PTA and state PTA have been doing listening events and speaking, reaching out to families to kind of see what's going on and what their concerns are. Basically, the top 3 concerns kind of come down to the socio-emotional health of our children and families, and making sure they are making it through these hard times. Many children had been, when the stay-at-home orders were first put in place, had reduced interaction with anybody and besides their family, and missing friends. And so that's a big concern of a lot of our families. Our second concern that we found is that there's a need for more communication at all levels about details on how school is going to open and what it's going to look like. Of course, there's things that are continuing to come out, and as Scott has mentioned, and Kim has mentioned that, and also Lori, that as every day now, there's more and more information about schools. I think that we've been finding that this is something that needed to be focused on for a lot longer than it has been, but we continue to fight for more communication about exactly what's going to be happening. The third concern is really for our most vulnerable children. We're really concerned about students who have special ed needs, people who are socially economically disadvantaged, and how any delay of being in school or in-person things that they need for their education to develop and continue to increase throughout the school year is really, really important. We really are hoping to get some more clear guidelines from the state and county health. We know that they can do that. They've done that for our businesses, and they've really set clear standards that's required for a business to open. And we feel like schools are just as important, and they can make those clear guidelines. We don't want watered down guidelines to that could possibly put any of our children or staff in schools at risk. We understand that many of the guidelines may not be economically feasible, but we really feel like we need that financial support to be able to provide a good education for our students. The federal, state, and county and city levels have provided additional funding for our local businesses to be able to flourish during this time and to make sure that they're open and keeping the economy going. We need that same funding for our schools. Not only is getting our children back in school in some form or manner, whether it's getting the most vulnerable and people that need to be in-person schooling, and making sure that those families that need to have their children in school to be in a safe environment while they're at work, we also need to have our kids back in school for the next generation to be able to have our future economy of tomorrow. We really need to start focusing more on how these government agencies can provide guidelines. They're able to do it. They came out with very specific guidelines to open up children's activities such as youth sports. Many of those leagues are open and children are finally out and getting together. I don't see why they can't make those same clear, concise recommendations for our schools so that our district and staff and teachers can really start planning on exactly what needs to happen. In addition, there's other things that the city has done. They've really put some time and money behind it to be able to open up youth programs such as the Junior Lifeguard Program, which is a amazing activity for children here in San Diego. And they put the mayor put the money behind to be able to open up that program so that our students can get out in the fresh air and finally do some activities. Basically, the PTA is really, really advocating for these government agencies to get guidelines and information available, because we know that to open up and for parents to feel comfortable to send their children to school, they need to know that the environments are going to be safe. That means we need thermometers, wipes, extra staff, extra counselors, extra people to make sure that the schools are sanitized, and all of that comes down to funding. And we are encouraging our parents and families to really advocate for that and talk to your representatives, because this is the time to get the support for our families. And we really want to make sure that our children have a future in education and that they can achieve all of their potential. So we need that support now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahogany. next speaker. By the way, I want to remind you all that if you have any questions, because I know a lot of questions are coming up in your minds, if you're like me, please just use the Q&A icon to submit that question, and we'll get to those after our fourth speaker. For now, we'll go to Keisha Borden, President of the San Diego Education Association, the teachers union.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Keisha Borden. I represent 6,500 educators in the San Diego Unified School District. Besides teachers, we also represent our nurses and counselors, speech language pathologists, school psychologists, and also our visiting teachers or substitutes. And so I just want to thank you for the invitation to be part of this important dialogue. So I want everyone to know that San Diego's educators are eager to get back to the classrooms where we can laugh with and talk with and care for and teach our students. But we know that even more important than teaching, our job right now in this pandemic is to make sure our students and our communities are safe. I mean, that's always our primary job in school, is to make sure our students are safe. Parents entrust their children with us for 6 to 7 hours a day, and we need to make sure they're safe. Just to put this discussion into context, just a couple of days ago on Thursday, there were 461 new COVID cases diagnosed, and there were 5 deaths on Thursday. We're experiencing this alarming surge that has once again closed down restaurants and bars and movie theaters statewide. Infection counts and death rates are shattering records, and hospitalization rates are increasing. We know this is a highly contagious, deadly disease, and the role of children in the transmission of COVID is really not clearly understood right now. Most recently, this past week, we saw the death of a teacher who was doing online teaching with 2 of her colleagues on a school campus. They were sharing a room, distancing, social distancing. All 3 contracted COVID, and one of them did in fact die from COVID. But in the midst of this huge uptick, this surge, deaths, there are people who feel that schools should open and that 500,000 students should file into the classrooms across San Diego County. 120,000 just in San Diego Unified specifically, without the funding to put any safety precautions in place. As some of our speakers have said, those in power are threatening educators and families that no funding will be provided if they refuse to go back. We need to reignite the economy. But our students and educators, the kindling to reignite the economy, many educators, not just here in San Diego, but across the country, want to get back into the classroom. We miss our students. However, we want to go back to these campuses safely without putting lives at risk. And at this point, with the infection rate spiking, we feel it's just not safe for our students, nor will it be safe for those welcoming those students back. Our educators live in multi-generational families. They're taking care of aging parents. They're taking care of their own children, grandchildren, other family members. Many of our educators themselves have underlying health conditions, or family members, folks in their household who have underlying health conditions. So I really think we need to take the remaining weeks before school is supposed to start and do the work and make the hard decisions to really contain the spread of this virus. And this push to reopen the economy is not happening in a context that has seen a proper response to the crisis. The response has put lives at risk. We understand that push to return and that people are asking if businesses are opening, why shouldn't schools? Well, I really think that's the wrong question, and it's one that prioritizes the economy over people's lives. Perhaps the better question is, if the economy relies so heavily on schools, then why aren't they being properly funded? Or how, if schools were underfunded before the pandemic, is it really possible to safely reopen without additional funding? Why have there been trillions of dollars in aid for Wall Street and crumbs for working families and public education? San Diego Unified is attempting to put safety protocols in place, but it's going to require adequate funding, additional funding, to turn those plans into a reality. We know that whenever our students do return, there's going to be a greatly increased level of social and emotional support needed from counselors or mental health professionals because of this impact of spending months in social isolation. Mahogany talked about it. This has had a huge impact on our students. Our families have experienced job loss and economic hardship and health distress. I know many families have experienced deaths from this, and our students are now needing help and support with dealing with that. At the same time, because of cuts to the educational funding, schools don't have currently enough nurses and counselors to really meet the needs of our students. So the questions we should be asking is why this is okay, and how as a city or a state or a country do we address the problems that COVID has really magnified and laid bare for all of us to see. Now, as poorly funded as schools are, they really are, as we've seen, the safety net for our families and our communities. We've seen our schools step up and provide, San Diego Unified has provided over 2 million meals to our students and their families. Why are schools the Band-Aid for the problems of hunger and healthcare and childcare for working families? We shouldn't be forced to put our lives on the line to fill this gap that is created by lawmakers who have failed to really support working families and our public schools. So again, we want to get back into the classroom, but how do we physically open schools in a way that ensures that the benefits outweigh the risks, especially for our most vulnerable students and those school communities? Now, if we don't go back, we have to look at distance learning. Educators and parents, we recognize that distance learning in the fall has to be an improvement over what we all experienced in the spring. I call it crisis teaching, crisis learning. It was thrust upon us. It was in the middle of a global pandemic. So it really wasn't the best case of distance learning. It was crisis teaching, crisis learning. So we have to take this time now to really develop a much more functional, equitable, and robust system of distance learning. In our talks with the district, we've already started discussing what's going to be needed to make sure what we call distance learning 2.0 will better meet the needs of our students and our families. Over the last few months, our educators have discovered what works, what doesn't work. They've developed best practices and found ways to connect with their students and families. As Mahogany said, communication is key. We really have to keep those lines of communication open with our families and our students to make sure they're getting what they need. We know there's going to need to be additional training for teachers, but also for students. We know that we have to make sure students have materials and books and supplies. There have to be these common learning platforms so families aren't having to learn multiple learning platforms if they have multiple children in the household. Our service providers like counselors and speech language pathologists and occupational therapists and ed specialists, they need support and training to find the best way to deliver those services, especially to our students with IEPs, our most vulnerable students. So we know that enrichment and electives and PE are also important, and those can't be put on pause if we continue distance learning. So we're working on those issues with the district, and we're fully committed to making it work. Just in closing, I think the president of our National Teachers Association said it best. No one wants to return to in-person instruction more than America's educators. We know more than anyone how distance learning has affected students' emotional, physical and intellectual well-being. We've seen firsthand how the coronavirus has widened inequities, especially for students of color, those with disabilities, those in poverty. We want to get back, and we want to do it when it's safe to do so. So there really is no other institution in our city or our county where it is more important to get this right. If we get this wrong, the implications are deadly, especially for our working families and people of color who we've seen are more highly impacted by this virus. So thank you again for inviting me to this important discussion.
Thank you, Keisha. That last statement was pretty much said it all. We have one more speaker. Richard Barrera is the Vice President of San Diego Unified School Board. Richard?
Yeah, thanks, Kim, and thank you, League of Women Voters, for putting this discussion together today. You know, as I'm listening to Scott's frame of the issues, to Mahogany's, perspective from parents, and to Keisha's clear perspective from teachers, I have to say that a tremendous confidence that we have the ability in San Diego to do our part to get this right. I think that the consensus around understanding how critical it is for our students to be back in school, particularly our most vulnerable students, and the consensus that we can only do it when it's safe, and that safety has to be defined by science, not by whatever the whims of Donald Trump or anybody else are at any point in time. I think there's such clear consensus in our local community about what we need to do. And so what I thought may be helpful is what I can outline is what I think we're going to be able to achieve over the next few weeks as we plan for the first day of school on August 31st, and then define what are the external factors that need to be in place in order for us to physically reopen and in order for us to have a quality remote learning program, which we know one way or another has to be available to students in our district. So in terms of what we will be doing over the next few weeks and what we have been doing, we are working on a plan school by school to identify what safe reopening needs to look like. Every school campus, of course, is different, and there are unique circumstances for each school campus. But as I think Keisha was talking about Mahogany, we know that there are certain things that have to be in place in order for the school campus itself to be safe. We know that we need to be able to maintain social distancing among students. And that likely means that we will need smaller groupings of students than we are, accustomed to. I think, Keisha and Mahogany both, talked about the fact that our school system, our school systems in California have been underfunded for 42 years. That's why the League of Women Voters is supporting Prop 15. So our class sizes are too big to begin with in normal circumstances, but obviously the groupings of students has to be much smaller if we're able to return to campus. Physically, we need the infrastructure to allow our schools to be safe. For instance, things like ventilation, in our air conditioning systems. We need to make improvements to that. We need, as I think Scott was suggesting, we need to be able to spread our campuses out and rely more on outdoor spaces, that really, take advantage of improved air quality outdoors versus indoors. We need to be cleaning our campuses more regularly and doing it more deeply. And that's both additional custodian personnel, but also additional cleaning equipment. We need to have in certain classrooms physical separators, desk separators, And of course, we need the personal protective equipment for students and staff physically. In terms of the support that we need the health support, and that is about nursing and additional health technicians on our campuses. And of course, we need the social emotional support. As I think Keisha talked about, our students have been experiencing trauma since the shutdown in mid-March. And over a variety of reasons, social isolation produces trauma in young people. The stress that their families are under, District D, the district that I represent, these are the families where the parents are working in the hotels. The parents are working in the restaurants and as home care providers. And so when, parents lose their job and their ability to provide for the family, of course, that produces stress on the kids. So that social emotional support needs to be in place. We will, by the end of this month, be very clear about what the school by school plans will look like in order for us to safely reopen and what those costs are. And that's work that, has been happening, for a while now, and it's work that will come to a head over the next couple of months. Then what we need to be thinking about is what are the public safety factors in our community that would allow us to implement our reopening plans. So again, we can do everything possible to keep our students and staff safe when they're on campus, but where we see the kind of community spread that Keisha is talking about, and of course, and unfortunately, we see inequities in that community spread. So we see in our highest poverty communities, a higher degree of community spread. And so if our students and staff are leaving our campuses, going back home, going back into the communities, and are likely to contract the virus, then bring it back to school and spread the virus, that's just simply not a safe situation. And it's why we shut down in the first place. So we need to be able to have clear protocols in place about what does the community spread need to look like in order for us to safely reopen. And a big part of that, of course, is also testing capacity. We need to have enough testing capacity so that we can quickly identify if somebody on a school campus contracts the virus and then be able to isolate, those individuals and, potentially be at a point that we need to shut a school down or shut the entire district down. So in order to work on those community protocols and testing capacity, we are developing partnerships. SDA and the district agreed this week that we would reach out to Chancellor Khosla at UCSD and identify a local group of scientists and public health experts that can inform us, because as Mahogany said, I got to say that, the public health guidelines as they exist right now from various sources are a lot of, you may consider doing this and you may consider doing that. And we can't make decisions based on that vague, and it's sometimes contradictory, set of public health criteria. So we will work with our own local team of experts to help inform us on the community spread metrics. And we're working with Supervisor Fletcher, the county, and folks from Rady Children's Hospital, Scripps Hospital, UCSD, on developing a testing protocol that allows us to identify quickly where we have positive cases on campus. All of that is happening. All of that will be work that we have a lot of clarity with, I'd say by the end of this month. The other issue that will become clear by the end of this month is, the issue that Mahogany and Keisha were talking about, which is funding. The federal government has to provide significant stimulus to schools across the country in order for us to reopen. No question about it. The CARES Act, the $2 trillion CARES Act, less than 0.5% of that went to schools. We have been very clear, not just our district, but education advocates around the country, including the PTA, including National Education Association, that we need to see hundreds of billions of dollars in the next federal stimulus in order for schools to safely reopen around this country. Because let's remember that we are needing to spend more money on all the issues that we talked about in a situation where we're seeing state education budgets decline, all over the country. We give a lot of credit and thanks to Governor Newsom, Senate Pro Tem Leader Tony Atkins, and the leaders of the legislature for passing a state budget that spares education cuts, which, by the way, is very different from what we saw a decade ago when the budget was balanced on schools. So we're in a good spot in terms of the current budget that the state legislature has passed, but of course it doesn't provide the extra funding that we need to do all the things that are necessary to keep schools reopened. So by the end of this month, we should know what Congress is going to do right now about providing extra federal stimulus. So by the end of this month, we will have clear plans in place at each of our schools. We will have negotiated agreements with the teachers, with the administrators that has been informed by conversations with the PTA and other important community groups. We will know exactly what we need in terms of resources to keep our schools safe. We will know exactly what we're getting in terms of extra funding from the federal government. And with our work with our partnership with UCSD, we should be very clear about where we are in terms of community metrics to make a decision about whether it will be safe to reopen on August 31st or whether we're going to need to delay physical reopening for some period of time. And we should have much more clarity in terms of our partnership with the county on what our testing capacity is that's available to schools. So we'll have all of that in place, which will allow us to make clear decisions about when it's safe to physically reopen schools. We will absolutely, and we're working with the teachers very closely on a more robust distance learning plan. So if some or all of our students are continuing with distance learning when we start the new school year, it'll be a much improved distance learning experience than, as Keisha said, than the emergency situation we were dealing with in the fall and in the spring. And then finally, what is in the control of all of us as San Diegans, and this is Scott's initial framing, is all of us have the ability to control the spread of this virus in our own communities. We did a good job, at the beginning, but then I think people started losing sight of the fact that the virus hasn't gone anywhere. There is no vaccine, and so it's on all of us to act responsibly and bring this virus under control. And the more that we can do that, the better position we'll be to get our kids back to school. But as Scott said, what is a more irresponsible either set of public policy decisions or set of personal decisions than putting ourselves and our communities at risk, and in the process making it very difficult to send our kids back to school where they need to be.
All right, thanks very much. I know we have a lot of questions, more than we've had on any of our previous Zoom events. And Lori's going to get to those. So if all the panelists can just turn their audio and video back on, we will get to the questions.
So yeah, thank you all. Thanks to all the panelists who've spent their time, their morning here, trying to help us find our way through this ever-changing discussion about how we're going to get our community back and get our kids in school or not. And I noticed through the discussion, I'm going to pull together, Kim and I are going to toggle back and forth between questions, but I did want to just kind of point out that this particular question seems to be like the perfect storm of all the problems and special environment that this whole situation has provoked. And I refer to Scott, who early on said that I think Supervisor Gaspar said she was not going to allow her kids to be tested or have their temperature taken or something to that effect. Scott?
Yeah, it was testing.
Okay.
So go ahead.
So, well, I mean, that's a good jump off to this question. So if we do implement protocols and we do come up with a robust testing policy and protocol whereby we can identify students early who perhaps might have been infected or be passing the virus, you know, where do we draw the line between public safety for our schools and communities and personal rights? You know, if our parents or our students don't allow themselves to be tested or have the temperature screen when they arrive at school, you know, there's another intersection of public safety issues that perhaps need to be addressed as well. And I'm just wondering if any of you have any ideas about how we can move forward on that.
Well, I'll begin. We always obviously want to be respectful of the perspectives of parents. However, you can't come to school if your kid's not vaccinated. And we know that this is a big, has become a big political issue, but I think there's overwhelming, consensus that it's simply not safe to have kids in school who are not vaccinated currently. And so, in terms of, there will be, responsibilities and expectations of parents. I think Scott referred to the issue of masks. If your kids are going to be at school, they're going to be wearing masks. If your kids are going to be at school and we've got testing available, you're going to have to participate in testing. There are a number of issues that we simply can't compromise on, because if we did, then we would see more outbreak in our schools, and that would jeopardize everybody's ability to be back at school. So there will be expectations and responsibilities on parents and students, that to the extent that we have safety protocols in place, everybody will need to follow those.
There are a couple of different ways that testing might go as well. There's a ability, for example, for them to test batches of people, maybe a whole school or classrooms. And if they detect it in that batch, they can drill down further. Otherwise, they can kind of give the clearance. I think you'll also see people try to stay in cohorts so that if you do find a batch that's infected, you can shut down not the entire campus. I think, though, it is important, 2 points I would point out. The melting of the anti-vaccination movement and the frustration with some of these things is real. Kristen Gaspar was using language that the anti-vaccination movement uses, that healthcare is between her and her family and the pediatricians and not the school's interest. But also, she failed to recognize that if you only have a little bit of money for some of the testing, you probably want to direct that to the adults in the system, at first, at least. So I think there's that aspect, especially, I mean, employers have a much different perspective than public, going to there. And then finally, on the mask issue, I think the one thing I'd be really worried about is if you do enforce masks, we're dealing right now with a reckoning about how enforcement over small, discipline issues can really get out of hand. And so we really need to have a big cultural buy-in into wearing the mask, because if you start to call police on kids that aren't wearing them or something like that, you could get into a really gnarly viral video situation. It could be, so it's just something to watch out for.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I'm going to scroll through these questions and we'll just throw these out to any of the panelists who are interested in taking them. So we have a question here. Can you talk about the relationship between learning ages and needs of young learners as we talk about long distance learning, and how it's going to be affected, how it will affect different age groups in learning?
Well, I think all ages of students need that social interaction. We know that high school students are craving that social interaction with their friends and being at school. But we also know that especially the youngest students really need that socialization of being at school and with their peers, and really just learning how to be with a group of other students and learning how to be in school. That's a skill in itself for our kindergartners and our first and second graders, just learning how to be a student. So it is important that those kids, the students, get back to school as soon as possible. And that's what's really hard for us, is just balancing. We understand, we know kids need to be in school, but they need to be safe as well. So it's just something that's very important. I know in some places, they're having the younger students come back before the older students. That's just one option that could be put in place. But there are lots of different options around scheduling and AB schedules and staggered schedules and all of that. But we all need to base those decisions on science and on what's best health-wise for our kids.
Great, thank you. Here's another question, and we'll just kind of scroll through as we go. And Kim, feel free to pop in with a couple of as you scroll through as well. A couple of you have mentioned on this panel discussion about aligning the particular tools that teachers are using to teach the students and creating like a consistent platform. I'm a mom of a school-age kid, and I will tell you, there were so many different platforms that each of the teachers were using that it was apparently just left up to the teacher's discretion as to how they were going to conduct their learning environments. And I mean, I'm technologically savvy enough to host a webinar like this, but I'll tell you, I really struggled with the homeschooling aspect of having my daughter, having to teach my daughter, and she will tell you it was a disaster. So is there anything in place right now to require teachers or train teachers on a particular platform or some kind of specialized platform in case we do have to stay at home and do homeschool again, that at least that it would be consistent and a parent would only have to learn one platform and would have like a more easy access to check in and helping their students?
I can jump in, and then it'd be great to hear from Keisha. So right now we are, working with SDA and with the teachers on the entire, online learning program, which obviously includes, these questions of digital platforms. And so what we will achieve again, by the end of this month is a clear plan for what's necessary to make online learning more effective, more robust, so that students and parents will have a different, and teachers will have a different experience than the emergency situation in the spring. An idea, that SDA has brought forward, which I think is an excellent idea, is that over the first week of school, if we're in a distance learning only situation, we should devote that time to a lot of training, training for teachers, training for parents, and actual training for students, and how to be more effective in participating in online learning. And so I think, as Keisha said, when the pandemic hit and we closed everything down, what we didn't want to do is be in a situation where there was no learning going on. So we tried to, pull together, a plan as quickly as possible. We have more time now to plan, and having a, sort of a district-wide, week of learning for everybody in that first week, I think would be a very, very useful thing for us to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. As I said earlier, we recognize that distance learning has to be more functional, more robust, more equitable. As far as the learning platforms, I think in our proposals, we've said there should just be 2 for secondary, 2 for elementary. Google Classroom is one that's in both. So elementary might be Google Classroom and Seesaw. Parents might be familiar with those. And then secondary, Google Classroom and Canvas, I think, was the other one. So we understand that for folks with multiple children, it has to be standardized. There cannot be 5 or 6 different learning platforms. So yes, definitely. And as far as the contact and the communication, we know that daily interaction is really important. Being able to communicate with your students every single day is really important. And so teachers are committed to that. And like I said, we've had these months to see what works and what doesn't work. I would love for us to be able to partner with Mahogany and the PTA and even some of the other parent groups in the district, ELAC, DLAC, the CAC, and really hear from parents and really hear what worked for them, what didn't work for them, and what they need from teachers. I think that would be really valuable in helping us create this distance learning 2.0 that we've been talking with the district about. So I look forward to doing that work, and I think it's really important to not only get the perspective of the teachers, but definitely the perspective of our parents, because they are the co-teachers. Distance learning doesn't work as well without support at home. That's one of the problems because not all of our kids have that support at home, but we also need to hear from those co-teachers. So I would love to partner with Mahogany and figure out some way for us to have that discussion with parents as well.
We, the PTA would love to partner and kind of get, help parents get trained for any distance learning. As a small caveat of, besides just having a more uniform platform, we found from talking to parents and also some teachers and stuff is that some of the kids, well, there was a number of kids when you came home, they didn't have supplies like notebooks, pens, pencils, erasers, construction paper. So you have to do projects that are given, and some of it has to be online, and which is really challenging. So, you know, our PTA right now is in the process of getting funding to be able to send home those kind of supply kits to families that are in the need of that. So they have those tools at home. I mean, for instance, my 3rd grader had to do a presentation for this a state and kind of put together a poster. Well, we didn't have poster board at home. So teaching your 3rd grader how to do Google Slides was a fun and exciting experience. It's a skill that's great. He now knows, and he can continue building on that throughout his school years. But it was still a little bit challenging when I would have liked to just cut out some stuff and put it on a poster board.
If I might just really quickly, part of the point of the charter school movement as well was to share things that it learned with the broader group of schools. There are charter and homeschool platforms that have been developing these practices and software platforms for many years. I would hope that both A, those are accessed and partnered with as much as possible, and then B, that the areas that are seeing the best interactions and environment and success, those teachers and others who are doing it can be really both sought out and highlighted and scaled out as best they can of passing along the best practices. One of the things that's so interesting about this, when you remove the physical space, is you remove the physical limitations too. You know, there is a chance at that point to scale out and find the best practices from either other partners or the best educators and learn and spread those out. And so I hope that just as I was sick to see the president politicize this discussion, I would hope that some of the other rivalries that we carried into this discussion about you know, charter schools and other things, like, let's see what we can do the best possible thing right now for the most number of people. And I'm really, I think the second point, I think this came up in the chat, there are some teachers who are really uncomfortable with online experiences and online, you know, a lot of elementary teachers who just, this wasn't a part of their daily life, calendar meetings and Zoom meetings and email and other things, and, you know, coordinating from that. And I think, like, it's going to be a real challenge to make sure that they find a place in this future, and you know, if we accommodate them, I just want to make sure that, because we're afraid of some of the tensions that might come up, we don't just hide from it. There will be some resentments that build up, if if parents, which I have seen, see their teachers disappear, kind of mail it in, and I'm not saying that was a widespread thing, but there is that chance, and we need to guard against that and make sure that that there's a real understanding of what everybody's doing at all times, so that we can know that we're going through this together, because the parents are really worried, and that's gonna get potentially bad over time.
Yeah, I want to thank you all for that robust discussion on this particular topic because, I think perhaps for the first time, parents got a real life taste of what this all looks like. And when I scroll through the questions here and I look through my emails from other people who had emailed me prior to this day's discussion, a lot of it was very parent centric and school, that question right there that you all took a great amount of time and consideration on is paramount. And I think it's because a lot of the general community and parents in particular have finally gotten a taste of what it feels like and looks like to manage this, environmental or educational circumstance at home with their kids. So I truly appreciate all the feedback here. And just to echo what Scott said, this is an opportunity for us to all figure out how to work together. And it's a brand new situation, and I think we all want the same thing, and we are just all coming at it from different perspectives, and it's a great opportunity to just work together and figure it out as a community. So I appreciate your comments there. So Kim, you want to answer another or ask another question from the audience?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions relating to teachers' hours and distance learning. So one of them says, if we go fully online at any point in the upcoming year, will the teachers be required to increase their maximum required number of work hours from 4 to what it was pre-COVID? And the second question is, if it looks like we're going to do distance learning, could the teachers start learning the platforms during the summer?
So
anybody?
Yes, I'll take that. So yes, we definitely need, to Scott's point and to Kim's question, teachers definitely need the support. We still have teachers who are struggling. And I think that really comes down to the educational inequities, the digital divide that we've seen for many years. There are some teachers who teach in communities where every child had their own device, every family had internet access, and they were able to implement distance learning and technology into their everyday teaching years ago. This is just something that they've been doing for 3, 4, 5 years. And so they're very well versed in distance teaching. There are other teachers who are in communities where, as we've seen, the district passed out 53,000 devices. So there are students who do not have access to devices, do not have access to internet at home and technology. And so teachers in those communities really could not start implementing technology and distance learning into their everyday teaching. So for them, this is extremely new. This is a brand new pedagogical strategy. Like, this is not in their teaching repertoire. And so those teachers definitely need more support. They need more training. Definitely the district has talked about offering trainings over the summer. There's recordings. I know the district in the spring offered dozens of training courses, dozens of opportunities for teachers to get that training. I hope it's recorded and accessible still. But yes, we definitely are going to need more training, and teachers always spend their summers preparing for the new school year. I mean, I've been getting calls from teachers saying, I need to start planning. What are we doing? It's like, we don't know yet, but we're working on it. So of course, teachers are going to be planning and preparing and getting ready for the school year. And so yes, they're very open to doing that and getting ready.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to chime in on that? If not, I have another 2-part question. So if there's an exposure, like say a student is diagnosed with coronavirus, the teacher for that classroom would presumably need to self-quarantine for 14 days, and the facilities would need to be deep cleaned. I read an article that said that the cost of deep cleaning averages about $22,000. So if this happens multiple times at any one school site, is the budget going to be able to accommodate what's going to have to happen?
What's going to have to happen if somebody tests positive in the schools? Is that the basic question? Yeah, so again, this is something that's very important. This is why we're convening the group from UCSD, because we need to have very specific protocols in place. And, you know, I think we all have ideas about what that, type of quarantining should look like. And, you know, we'll approach this with, ideas that, we've developed through, trying to do our research on best practices. But we really need experts, to inform us about this. None of us, in maybe a few exceptions, but, either the educators or the, administrators in the district, we're not scientists, we're not public health experts. So having, a team that can really advise us on that is critical, and that's why we've reached out to them. Deep cleaning is incredibly important, and that is again something that we can define how often it needs to happen and what the costs are of doing additional deep cleaning. We actually have a pretty good handle already on what that looks like, and this is again, when we say to the federal government that schools across the country need hundreds of billions of dollars, we can line by line lay out what those actual costs are. We're not making this up. It's based on what we know is true in our own district, and then if you extrapolate that across the country. So, as we've been advocating, through the state budget process as well, we were very detailed in, talking to the legislature and the governor about what the additional costs are. So we can be very clear about what those costs are, and we also have to be very clear about protocols in case somebody tests positive. But we're looking to scientists and public health experts to inform that.
If I might jump in real quick, I think this drives home why it's so important for the county to be more involved in this. Right now, we have this political culture that basically leaves K-12 education on its own, and is so afraid to touch it in any form. That's why they're talking about bars and restaurants constantly, and rarely can be bothered to talk about schools. It was why this week's development that they were even going to start testing was such a positive one. Schools are not public health experts. School administrators are not public health experts. They can't administer a testing regime. That's not what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be educating kids. And so if you have political clout, or if you can just write to the county supervisors and make it clear that this should be as high a priority as anything else they're doing, from food assistance to childcare to health and welfare. There are so many health issues at public schools that we cannot punt to the school districts. And this needs to be the highest priority of the mayor, the highest priority of county supervisors, the highest priority of state legislators. And it is not right now. And it is very clearly not. And it's just really upsetting to watch a 45-minute discussion about bars and outdoor eating and a 5-minute discussion that was really full of poisonous points about schools. It's like there's the disproportion, and it's because we've built a political infrastructure that really is terrified of engaging in K-12 education challenges. And we have got to convince the people, the mayors and particularly the county supervisors, that that's not the way it can continue.
That's a great point, Scott, and all of you. I appreciate your feedback on that. And to Scott's point about activism and advocating for schools, we're going to have at the end of this presentation some opportunities for you to get involved. But just to reiterate what Scott said, if you can tell your elected officials what your values are and what your priorities are, that goes a long way in helping move this discussion forward. I have a couple of questions that are related, so I'm just going to go ahead and ask them both in a single question, but they have to do with after school care and enrichment providers like Mad Science and the Chess Academy. So I'm just curious, or these two questioners are just curious about the after-school programs, and if any of the organizations on this panel are reaching out to them to help engage them in the not only the learning but the opportunities for specialty skills and to relieve classroom instructors going forward.
Again, I'll jump in. I'd love to hear from Keisha, Mahogany, and Scott. So in terms of obviously being able to provide after school programming physically on campus, it's the same analysis that we've got to go through to open our schools in general. We do have some great organizations, and I'll just name a few of them, that regularly provide after school programming for our students and who quickly jumped to do it, to be able to do it virtually in the shutdown. Ocean Discovery Institute, which is a great program in City Heights that provides science education for students in the Hoover cluster, immediately jumped into doing online programming. The Fern Street Circus, which is a great local program that comes out of my neighborhood in Golden Hill. They've been training kids to walk tight ropes over the internet and actually delivering like tightrope kits to, they've been doing a great job. The Cesar Chavez Service Clubs that I'm involved with, we immediately moved to online programming, and we immediately raised a relief fund for families to help with financial assistance. So we have great after school nonprofit community providers that immediately jumped into to support kids, and we will continue to work with them and partner with them and ask them what they need, how we can support them. And again, we're very thankful to the San Diego Foundation and United Way and Supervisor Fletcher and others who put together the COVID Relief Fund, because that's providing financial assistance to those nonprofit community-based organizations so that they can continue to do this. So that's a critical part of what we're able to do.
Just a note, shout out to the YMCA as well. They've been running summer camps right now, all outdoors. I think really modeling what can be done outdoors, temperature checks when you go in, some real reasonable measures. The outdoors is an ally that I think we need to tap into, especially here. They're talking about doing outdoor schooling in New York, Minnesota, places. There was a proposal today to close streets around schools in New York to spread out. Those places have much worse weather conditions than we have. We could, invest maybe a little bit in tents and other places. I think that, I think we're just going to have to really expand our minds about what is possible, and what can we achieve? What are some goals that are achievable for education in this environment that aren't maybe the same standards and such that we've been dealing with for so many years, but that are about making sure that we can give the most number of kids the best experience possible while we go through this national, crisis. And so I hope that, we can really tap into some creativity. And, there's a real bad side of the federal government punting to the state and the state punting to the school district. And that's that we have no direction. But the good part of that is that we have no direction. Like, we could take creative responses and set a standard for the rest of the country about how we adapted and changed. And so it's awful, but it's also an opportunity.
I just wanted to just kind of highlight that everyone's been saying like how there's a lot of planning been around other businesses and how K through 12 has not been prioritized, nor have children. I think one of the first things that was opened when things were reopening was golf courses. And even when golf courses were open, you still didn't have childcare facilities. There was no planning or guidance for summer camps. And that was, as things were starting to roll out, we were getting into the point where children had been at home or in maybe just in their neighborhood for going on 3 months. there is planning, and our government has spent the time and has clearly stated how a grocery store is supposed to work, how a restaurant is supposed to work, how an office building is. We just need all of those ideas then just put in and clearly stated for our schools and for all of the after school programs and other activities that involve our children, which help our families be able to get back to work and try to be in a more normal lifestyle of having our kids participate in life and our families be able to participate in life and also going to work. So I think that it's there. It's just that they need to really be pushed to take those same concerns for the rest of the economy for our students and our families.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Mahogany. Our schools and students and education has to be a priority, or this is not going to work. Far too much discussion has been happening around businesses reopening with very little discussion around schools and what the city and the county can do to support schools. The question referenced after school programs like Mad Science and things like that. We're really going to need community partners to fund those things, because I know the school I taught at for 20 years, we didn't have those kinds of things because they cost too much. And our school couldn't afford those things. So I appreciate organizations like the Chavez Service Clubs who came in and offered leadership opportunities for our kids after school and things like that. But we're really going to need other groups to contribute and help support our schools.
Great, thank you. And like I said, we will put up on the screen a couple of options for like websites you can visit and participate in and support towards the end. And we are going to try to wrap up at 11:30, so in about 5 minutes, but I just wanted to get a couple of questions in under the wire. A couple of questions have to do with timing and timelines and, you know, just the nuts and bolts of like when we're going to get information and when students are going to know what is in store for them and parents can make plans to move forward, et cetera. So I know, Richard, you went through a series of detailed steps that you were aware of and that were going to be coming in. And can you just really briefly reiterate, or any of you, just talk about timing on when we're going to know something?
I think by the end of July, we'll be able to be very clear, you know, with all of our parents and all our community, what will happen August 31st. And again, the key information points that we're building towards are our detailed school by school plans, our community health metrics, and, you know, federal funding. And we'll have, I think, a lot of information on all three of those areas by the 31st. We hopefully will have, you know, our negotiated agreements in place with SDA and ASD and the other unions. And so I think we'll be able to be clear by the end of this month.
Kim, do you want to throw one more question out before we wrap up?
Yeah, San Diego Unified has many classroom buildings without windows that can open, and even doors that open into interior hallways with no ability to create ventilation. How can in-person instruction occur on these campuses?
So our facilities people are literally going through classroom by classroom, school by school, and identifying in some cases, you know, you've got to improve the air conditioning systems. In other cases, you can open doors and open windows. In other cases, you know, we need to construct learning spaces outdoors. So all of that is part of this, you know, detailed planning that's happening school by school.
I didn't want to steal Richard's thunder, but from being on the ICOC and seeing all the construction work that has been done at our schools and the push that was in to get AC into all of our schools, and the board a number of years ago approving that, that has really helped improve our ventilation systems for all of our schools throughout the district. And we've been lucky to have those bond measures to be able to pay for those fixtures of our schools and improving the conditions. And like Richard said, a lot of the AC units and HVAC units are going to be able to help create better ventilation. I think there's going to be more information about that, I'm sure, as things come out about what school's going to actually look like.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have a couple of minutes, and as I said at the beginning, I wanted to take a little bit of time to do advocacy work. I think people who come to these events, they want to feel like they can make a difference and they want to have their voices heard, and the League is all about public participation and empowerment. So to Scott's point, I'm just going to follow up with what he said about writing a letter to your Board of Supervisors and any elected official who you think is going to help mitigate this circumstance, even if it's just pulling together plans or a task force, et cetera. We need to talk about funding. We've had several questions on our Q&A here that requested information about funding, et cetera. And so I want to reiterate what I said at the beginning of this meeting, where there will be a ballot measure on your November ballot. It is advocates for statewide funding. It's called Schools and Communities First. It's Prop 15. It closes a tax loophole that commercial property and commercial real estate tax has been getting for, as Richard mentioned, the last 40 years, that has resulted in vast underfunding of our schools in California. It does not affect homeowners' taxes. It's not about residential taxing. It's about commercial property taxing. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go to schoolsandcommunitiesfirst.org, and you can learn all about that initiative. The League will be advocating for that going forward. We do prop talks every election cycle where we'll share information about that. You can learn about advocacy for it on the Schools and Communities First website. Also, I think Kim has a link to the PTA organization that you can participate in. Kim, do you want to share some more information about advocacy there?
Yeah, I put a link in the chat for the Cal State PTA. There's a quick and easy form you can use to contact your federal legislators. And I can also send out an email through Eventbrite as well, just to follow up on it on the links that we've put out today. So everyone will have those in their email. And then if you want to share the video of today's event with anyone, we'll have it on YouTube by tomorrow. And it's also on Facebook right now. So I'll include all those links in an email.
Great, thank you. Well, with that, I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank everybody who attended. I hope we all got some good information and fodder for thought and activism going forward, and some good support for our schools here in San Diego. So thank you all, and have a good rest of your Saturday.
Thank you. Have a good Saturday.
Thank you so much.